Welcome to another episode of Gioco podcast. And let me begin with a little introduction. Um, in the annals of interactive fiction, few names carry the weight of legend like those associated with fighting fantasy. Born from the brilliant minds of Steve Jackson and Jan Livingstone, that hopefully will join us in this podcast this month. This series didn't just create game books, it forged an entire generation of readers who learned that they could be the hero of their own story. And Jon Green is not merely an author, he is the chronicle of this dream. His masterwork, You Are the Hero, stands as the definitive exploration of fighting fantasy's legacy, and is actually a love letter to this series. But John's contribution goes far beyond documentation. He has penned numerous fighting fantasy adventures himself, proving that he doesn't just study the formula, he masters it. Now, in 2026, John has expanded his mastery into new territory, the our beloved cosmic horror of H.P. Lovecraft's universe. His Arkham Horror Investigators gamebooks, The Darkness over Arkham, The Tides of Innsmouth, and the brand new The Kingsport Metamorphosis represent a bold evolution in interactive fiction. And today we explore this evolution through the eyes of someone who has lived it, studied it, and continues to revolutionize it. Hi, John, welcome. Let's start with your exciting new venture into Lovecraftian territory. You've created a series of Arkham Horror Investigator game books, which, by the way, I reviewed on NetGalley in preview, if I remember. The Darkness over Arkham came out in 2024, The Tides of Innsmouth in 2025, and the Kingsport Metamorphosis just launched in February 2026. Correct me if I'm wrong. How did this collaboration with Aconite Books begin, and what drew you to adapt the cosmic horror genre into interactive fiction?
And then they wanted to commission a third, and the writer who'd done the first two wasn't available, so they asked me to do one. So I ended up writing a Moon Knight game book for Marvel. But then Aconite was part of Asmodee, and well, still is. But Asmodee was bought out by, I think, Enforcer, and it became company policy only to develop their own in-house IPs that they owned. So they gave up the Marvel license. So from there onwards, there'd be no more Marvel game books. But they wanted to develop game books still using their own properties, and Arkham Horror was what they wanted to do. And because I'd worked on the Marvel books, they asked if I'd be interested in writing at least the first one. So it was really a collaboration with the editorial team, basing the rules on elements of the Arkham Horror card game using the same stats, but maybe having them work in a slightly different way, but also using some of the rules that have been developed for the Marvel game books. So I wrote the first one, as you say, The Darkness over Arkham, and then so far there's 3 available. Each one, they have the same rules, but we try and do something slightly different each time. So normally with how there's a Doom mechanic, so how that works in each game book is slightly different.
Okay.
But yeah, in terms of why the Cthulhu mythos, well, because they asked me to, but also it's something I'd used in game books before myself. And also several years ago, I edited an anthology of short stories, Shakespeare versus Cthulhu. So that had elements, obviously, of Lovecraft stories in there as well. So it's something I'm not sure how. When I first began writing Lovecraft pastiches, I've written a novella called The Serpent's Egg, which was published probably over 10 years ago now. So it's always been there in the background and an interest of mine.
Okay. And moving from traditional fantasy adventures to investigating eldritch mysteries is quite a leap. How does writing for the Arkham Horror universe differ from your fighting fantasy work? What challenges does Cosmic Horror present in a game book format?
Okay, if I start with the second part first. In terms of the challenges, partly the setting, you have to be true to the Arkham Horror game. So the setting itself is the 1920s in Massachusetts, New England, pretty much. Although obviously there are novels and things. I think lots of people, when they write their own, their first introduction was something like Fighting Fantasy or Lone Wolf, which are fantasy settings. But there's no reason why they have to be set within a fantasy milieu. I mean, Choose Your Own Adventure had all sorts of different settings for those. And it's just any situation where you can present the reader with choices to make. So that's an element of what I find fun about writing them, is trying to bring different things out from the different settings and the different background ideas.
In these books, players can choose from different Arkham investigators like Agnes Baker, Rex Murphy, or Nathaniel Cho. How do you balance giving each investigator a distinct experience while, maintaining narrative coherence across all paths?
That's a tricky one, because as well as having the 3 investigators for the one adventure, the idea is that you can play any adventure with any investigator. So I think there's now, I have to get this right, something like 16 different investigators available, because there's 3 in each book. There's also then downloadable content from each one, which is available on the Arkham Horror website. And also there's 2 more that appear in the graphic novel, The Terror at the End of Time. So the idea is that you can pick up any adventure that's been published or will be published and play as any of those investigators. So it does mean that we have to be very careful about introducing new rules, but we generally work it on keywords. So you might have weaknesses or abilities, and those can work with all sorts of different characters. So it's a bit of a trick, really. The things which make it completely unique to those investigators are a major weakness or a major ability, which then doesn't appear in anybody else's investigator sheet. And it doesn't actually directly interact with anything in the text, but it will be, for example, if you make a sanity check, say you've got some ancient heirloom, that if you fail, you lose an additional sanity point. So it's something which you take the rule from the sheet and apply it to the character. It doesn't have any direct interaction with the novel itself, with the game book itself. So yeah, we're hoping to do more of these. So anything we introduce now has to work for any characters who are already out there as well. So you can't suddenly introduce a rule which those previous 14 or 16 investigators don't have on their sheet. So that's it took a while to get it right. We worked out the rules of how to continue an investigator on as well. So you could also choose one investigator and play several adventures with them, and rather like Lone Wolf, your character will level up slowly as you go through the adventures.
Very interesting. Let's switch now to the Fighting Fantasy Legacy.
Okay.
You Are the Hero is considered the definitive work of fighting fantasy history. What drove you to undertake such an ambitious project? Was it born from, scholarly curiosity, personal nostalgia, or something deeper?
I think it's probably all 3. It first started when Wizard Books still had the rights to publish the Fighting Fantasy books. And it was coming up to the 30th anniversary of Fighting Fantasy, which was marked with Ian Livingstone's Blood of the Zombies being published. And I pitched to Wizard Books at the time to say, what about the history of Fighting Fantasy? And I said it could be like a coffee table book, lots of artwork. And they said, it's a great idea, but it's far too expensive. So that was shelved. So I then approached SFX magazine here in the UK. I had books reviewed by them before, and I'd done some small pieces for them. And I suggested a history of fighting fantasy game books, which they commissioned, and I think it was 2,000 words. And I said, I'll need more than that. Can I have 3,000? So they said yes. Then what I ended up submitting was about 7,000 words long. And I said, I realize this is really unprofessional. If you want me to go away and cut it down to 3,000, I will, but just have a look at it first. And they published the whole thing. And part of that was effectively written like a fighting fantasy game book, but using the years as the turn twos. So you could progress through from 1982 to, get it right now, 2012 at the time. And then I thought, well, writing that, I know a lot about fighting fantasy. I've written for the series and I've read the books for years. But the more I looked into it, the more I realized I didn't know. So I then thought, this needs more than just an article. It needs a proper book. And at that point, I thought, well, I'll self-publish it. It'll be about 30,000 words long. And then a friend of mine said, have you heard of Kickstarter? It's coming to the UK. I think it was later that year, something like that. So I looked into it. And before I could have my project ready to go, there was one launched called Turn to 400, which was to make a documentary about the history of fighting fantasy. Unfortunately, it didn't make its funding, but it did raise, potentially, if it had finished, I realized there was some money out there and some fans were happy to pay for history. So I then launched mine, and fortunately it raised about the same amount of money as they'd achieved with their documentary, but my costs were lower. So it meant my project was successfully funded. Then I started writing it, and again, it just grew in the telling, because I'd interview somebody and they'd say, oh, you should talk to this person, or did you know about this? So it went on and on and on. As a result, the book was about 9 months late, but it ended up being 100,000 words long with something like 400 pieces of artwork published, some of them A4 size, some that had never been published before. I was very lucky because Ian and Steve both let me have a look at some of their archive material. So there's handwritten pages from their first, I think it's like Ian's first opening sections of City of Thieves. There are 2 different rules for which they wrote for Warlock of Fartop Mountain, which eventually got, I think they used Steve's in the end because he was the one who rewrote the book to make sure it had one voice. But all these sorts of things and all these treasures. But even having written that, I realized that there was still more to tell. So a few years later, I published You Are the Hero Part 2, which added some of that. And some of those people I'd not been able to contact who'd since been in touch, I then spoke to them. And again, for the 40th anniversary, I decided to do it all in one volume, update it, and also write it as a game book. So that became the definitive version. And it's something like 170,000 words long. And it has 400 sections like a traditional fighting fantasy game book.
Wow. Walk us through the unique challenges of crafting branching narratives. How do you ensure every path feels satisfying while maintaining story coherence? It must be like writing multiple novels simultaneously. Or
yes. So I always start off with a notepad. I always make my first notes by hand, even though I don't write my books longhand, which I did with the very first ones until I got a word processor. But I've got a pad in front of me. It's actually got the notes for the book I'm working on at the moment, which hasn't been announced. So I have to be a bit careful. But I'm trying to. So I'll have. Here we are. Yep. So I don't know if you can see that on the screen, but my writing that might just be visible. So I make lots of notes, lots of ideas. I sometimes start to draw a few maps. I maybe work out roughly how sections might be broken up. But I start with a very simple overview. So there might be 15 what I would call scenes throughout the whole book. And that will be 400 sections of game book. But I then break it down and write it or plot each of those individual scenes at the time. So yeah, when I'm coming up with the ideas, it's sometimes it's quite hard because you come up with a really, well, what you think is a really cool scene or an exciting event or some gruesome monster, and yet if the players do the right thing, they'll never meet it. But you still have to write each one as if it is on the right path. So anybody who encounters these things, it doesn't sort of give it away by being underwritten that it's not important. So there are tricks as well you can use with how you phrase things, so that you have to give the idea that it feels like when you turn from one paragraph to the next that there's the flow. Maybe doesn't always work as well as it might, but so even if you come from 5 different routes, it still makes sense and seems like they all follow on after each other. So yeah, like I say, there's certain tricks you can use for that. But it's a lot of planning. When I wrote my first game books before I was ever commissioned, I really did make it up as I went along, and I draw a map as I went along, and I might have some ideas, but it wasn't particularly well organized. Whereas now I'm very disciplined. I do my overall flow chart. Then when I come to write an individual scene, I'll break it down again. So, and I still do it all by hand. So here's, again, very simple flow chart for my current adventure.
Maybe it's too light. It's too bright. It's too bright. Okay.
Not sure.
No.
Okay.
No, I can only see a white page.
I promise there's something on there. I don't know if that. No,
Oh, yeah,
maybe
yeah,
not.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay,
Oh, there we
okay.
go.
That's right.
Yeah. So I just do my flowcharts by hand. That then gives me something to work from, and it might change as I'm writing it. And I try to remember to update it on the flowchart because it's helpful later when you're checking through editing the book. But yeah, so then I write the sections and I write it quite roughly. I write the whole thing in order, so I don't write the correct route and then add in all the other bits at the end. That said, I will leave one less important scene to write at the end so that I can make it all fit into a nice round number. Because although I might say each, this scene's got 20 sections, this scene's got 10 sections, when you write it, you realize, oh, actually, maybe I didn't need as many for that one. I can use some other method, or you think I need to add an extra option in here because if they come from here with that object. So it just means at the end I can tidy things up neatly and they all have a nice round number without feeling like anything's been rushed or missed out.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fighting Fantasy and Arkham Horror both master the cliffhanger ending to each section. How do you craft that perfect balance between resolution and anticipation? In your opinion, what makes a reader desperate to turn the page?
I mean, first of all, game books, the reader has agency. So that, well, I think will always keep them turning the page because they get to choose what happens next. Most of the time, obviously, there might be dice rolls or it might be dependent on another element you might have picked up in the game. I mean, I've watched lots of films and read lots of books, so lots of people have done the amazing cliffhangers. So I guess it's all baked in that way. I've also written novels, so with that you can't although you have rising action as it goes through the novel, it can't always be at this high level. You have to have peaks and troughs in the excitement levels. So it's the same thing in a game book. While you've had a dramatic fight scene, afterwards you'll have something a bit calmer with some exploration or a chance for some healing or something like that, or a puzzle to solve before you get led into the next dramatic scene. But yes, when I make my first notes in my notepad, a lot of that is I'm coming up with the set pieces I'd like to include. Sometimes the setting will provide that. In the case of my Ace game books, which are inspired by existing books or legends, obviously those stories will give me a lot of those story beats. But yeah, it's very pulpy, and it's that's the sort of fiction and films that I've enjoyed in the past myself. So yeah, there's plenty of source material there.
Video games now offer sophisticated branching narratives that, in my opinion, dwarf anything possible in print. Yet, game books endure. In your opinion, what does the book format offer that even the most advanced video game cannot?
I think that the actual experience of reading, and I include the physical experience in this as well, is unique with books. Because as you say quite rightly, there's amazing video games, but they haven't replaced game books, just like movies haven't replaced book sales. So I think there's something, even when you have illustrations, the ideas and the scenes that the reader conjures up in their own head, having been given those triggers in the text, are unique to each reader and are the most amazing special effects. So I think that's part of it. In terms of the game aspect, I suppose there's an element where, yes, you can have games on phones, but you can take a book anywhere. You don't need to make sure it's charged. So you can always pick it up and dip into it and then put down again. I'll apologize. My dog's going to come to see me. He's barking at me. But it probably means there's a car outside. Anyway, he's gone away again. Yeah, so I think it's that physical sense of literally holding the book in your hands, turning the pages, decoding the text, finding the puzzles, leaping backwards and forwards. And also, because of the nature of turning backwards and forwards, you don't have an absolutely clear idea of where you are in the adventure and how far you're through it. So it keeps that element of tension and surprise, I imagine. So, yeah.
um, Choose Your Own Adventure and versus Fighting Fantasy. Both series seem similar to casual observers, but gamebooks fans are passionate about the distinctions. In your opinion, what makes Fighting Fantasy and your Arkham Horror books superior to simple choice based narratives?
I mean, I think this is as I've talked about this before, but choose your own adventure is a good catch-all term, particularly for people in America to understand what a game book is. But I would argue that they are not game books, because certainly the choose your own adventure I've read in the past, I know they're still publishing them, so it might be different now, but you literally, it's just a branching narrative. You just choose where to go next. And yes, it has an element of choice, but so it's not as bad as Snakes and Ladders, which I think, you know, isn't even a game. It's literally you roll the dice, it's random whether you win or lose. There's nothing you can do as a player that will influence your success in that game. It's a bit like that with Choose an Adventure, except that yes, you are making a choice, but quite often there's no indication of where it might lead, and there's no overall puzzle to solve. So it's just coming up with a different story each time. Now, you could do a game book using a choose your own adventure format where there are no RPG rules, no dice to be rolled, and you could still have a puzzle to be solved and a game to be completed in that way. But most obviously, when you add the RPG elements and the dice rolling, then it becomes absolutely a game as well as a book. So I think, although yes, you have agency in a choose an adventure, it's pure chance what's happening next. You're not really, you're an observer to what develops. It's not quite the same as I've done this action because I'm trying to achieve an ultimate goal. So I think that's where I would say game books are preferable for me, because they're more satisfying. Once you've got to the end, you feel you've actually accomplished something, hopefully, if it's well written. And yes, there is an element of randomness. It's one that I battle with, because there are people who definitely expect it, and there have been game books written where there are no random elements. So, for example, the virtual reality series written by Dave Morris and others, while still having RPG elements, there were no randomized elements. It was based on the choices you made and how your character was set up at the start. As I write more books, I kind of want to remove the randomness more. Certainly when I started out writing fighting fantasy books, some of them were very unfair, and you'd have lots of dice rolls and stat tests. So, for example, I wrote one called Blood Bones, which is zombie pirates. And towards the end, you're working your way through a voodoo temple. And there's a series of dice rolls where if you fail any of them, it's your adventure is over. And I feel now that's very unsatisfying and very unfair on the readers. So with game books now, although I've still got a random element, I will often give people a second chance if they're doing really badly, or if they find an object, it will help them through that part. And then if they don't have the object, they can make a dice roll instead and still have a good chance of succeeding. But yeah, having that slight random element does bring another element to the game. It's something that it's not all completely predictable. So there's an element of tension and excitement. I realize I'm saying element far too much. Yeah, I think because I've grown up with game books from the age of 10, they're just in my DNA. I have novelist friends say, how on earth do you write one? And I think, well, it's not that hard. You just do this, you just do that. Because I've read them, I've played them, I've analyzed them, I've written my own. I still sometimes look at other people's, break it down, sometimes out of my own curiosity and sometimes professionally. Yeah.
Talking about RPG role-playing games, both Fighting Fantasy and Arkham Horror emerged from tabletop gaming traditions or tabletop role-playing game tradition. Um, in your opinion, always, how much cross-pollination is there between game books and role-playing games? Do they serve different needs or complement each other?
I think they complement each other, and I think there's an increasing amount of cross-pollination. So, yes, obviously there was D&D. Steve Jackson and Livingstone played D&D. They loved it, and then they were supposed to write a book about how to play role-playing games, and instead they thought
the first game book of the history.
Exactly, to get them to experience a role-playing game firsthand. So the very first Fighting Fantasy book was written to be what we would now call a solo RPG. It's not quite the same as a solo RPG, because I think the ones that I've seen, certainly there's the way that they're played, there's another element, and quite often journaling is involved, and you're sort of generating the adventure yourself, although randomly. But yes, people, obviously we borrowed RPG mechanics, simplified them for a game book, but then you now see game books RPGs which produce solo elements which are written like
Mm.
a game book. So, for example, I'm thinking of the Pendragon RPG.
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
seen some of their adventures like that. You also get board games which use elements of game books. They might be presented on cards, but that's becoming an increasingly popular feature among designers. And then equally, you have people developing RPGs, and then people playing those are seeing what they're doing with the rule design, like I say, having diceless narratives, and then bringing it back into game books. So I think there's a continual ebb and flow. I mean, it's not just um, tabletop RPGs either, it's computer games. Michael J. Ward, who created the Destiny Quest series and is about to launch his new Sunfall interconnected world on Kickstarter. His books are heavily influenced by video games. I think Sunfall, I think, has Dark Souls and Elden Ring. His playing of those games has fed into what he's done with that adventure. And I think Destiny Quest was partly inspired by World of Warcraft. So there's that continual give and take between the two. And as you
Mm.
say, I think they complement each other. And people who maybe like to play RPGs with their group, if they can't get together, they can always sit down with a game book to sort of scratch that itch.
And by the way, even in some, I'm thinking about mm, the Call of Cthulhu RPG in the starter set. The first, the tutorial adventure is
Yeah,
is a game book
yeah,
because you are alone. Yes, okay, you have to follow the rules of the role-playing game, but it's essentially a game book because you have to make some choice, following some rules.
yes,
So it's a really cross-pollination. Um, in game books, there's always hidden mathematical structure,
yes,
especially in successful game books.
yeah.
Probability curves, resource distribution, difficulty scaling. How much is conscious and calculated design versus intuitive balancing?
I will be completely honest with this one. With
Okay.
me, it starts off very much intuitive balancing.
Mm.
Um, I guess partly because I've written so many books, I've got a rough idea at least of how things could work. I must admit, though, that these days I do use some probability curves. I've worked them out to try and give some sort of balance for I'm trying to think which book it was for now. But anyway, there was one where so I was checking how likely it was that a certain outcome and how fair different checks would be. That's another reason why talking about wanting to change mechanics, game books are forever, or most of them seem to use 2d6, and mine do as well. But part of me feels there'd be something really nice and simple about using just 1d6 because the
Yeah.
probabilities would be far simpler. Um, but yes, and then equally with resource distribution, the difficulty scaling, yeah, I mean, I think it all goes hand in hand. But the other thing which I have now is a great group of playtesters. So with my own game books and also now the ones that I write for Arkham Horror, I do have some friends who I employ, and they are very mathematically minded. They're
Mm.
very rigorous, which is brilliant. So they will pick up on maybe things that I've missed, or they might say this is. Sometimes they don't say it's too hard; they say it's too easy because my game books I've mellowed with time. So having written Impossible Fighting Fancy game books, they're now much fairer. And I think I'm more interested now in writing adventures that people can complete and feel that they've got through satisfactorily. And also, fighting fantasy certainly used to be sold on the idea that there's one true path, whereas now, because of computer games, I think people want replayability. So my own Ace game books are written where there's multiple different routes with varying outcomes. Some might be more successful than others. So you can have like the gold standard ending, but you might get to the bronze ending where you haven't survived, but you stop the big bad. Um, so yeah, it starts off very intuitively. I leave lots of options to myself. Then I settle on something using some probability curves and the like, and then I send it off to my playtesters who fix everything that's wrong with it for me.
On this note, talking about balancing challenge and fun, both Fighting Fantasy and Arkham Horror are famous for being genuinely challenging. How do you calibrate that balance between rewarding clever choices and punishing poor ones? What makes failure feel fair?
That's yes, that's something which I've definitely changed. So the worst example is where you've got two doors in front of you. Do you go to the left or the right door? There's no description to say what might be behind each door, or any clues beforehand to suggest one's more dangerous than the other. You open the left door, you're dead, game over. I think those, and I'm guilty of writing them myself for a long time, but they're very
But now
unsatisfying.
it's not fair to write this like this. It's not
Exactly,
accepted. It is not accepted
exactly. So
from the
if I
reader.
did something like that now, I'd obviously try and set up. So you might say, there's a cold breeze blowing under the left-hand door. You open the left-hand door, it's a precipice, but you get to make an agility check to see if you grab onto the door handle in time. And if you do, then you're safe. If you fail that check, then you plunge to your death. That's a very basic example. But yes, I try to make it fairer so that people have the information. And if they don't have any information, that it's not going to be game ending for them.
Mhm.
Um, I do feel I don't like it where game books branch, and actually when you get down to it, none of the branches make any difference. You could have chosen any of them and end up in the same place. There
That's
should always,
very bad design.
yeah, there should always be something, even if it's just a piece of information or you get a penalty or a bonus. There should be something that makes it different, even if they all end up going back to the same section.
Where do you see interactive fiction heading in the next decade or in the next 5 years? Are there emerging technologies that could revolutionize the medium, the way fighting fantasy revolutionized publishing?
I think I've been asked this question over the years, and it's always seems to be the same answer, and it's we always seem to be in a similar situation. So game books still exist because of crowdfunding and self-publishing. Many more people can actually get their adventures out there for people to read and enjoy. Um, at the same time, as you say, there's more games all the time that are using some sort of game book element, or you could describe as a game book. And I feel that they're going to continue to go hand in hand. I think the biggest fear that people have currently is that AI is going to produce them and take it away from the real writers and the real artists. And I know there's all sorts of arguments for people wanting to produce something that looks good, but not having the budget to do it. But it's a slippery slope. And there are certainly people who will not even pick up your game book if they feel that it's got any AI influence at all. But I understand that these programs and large language models are improving all the time, but I don't feel that at present an AI could do what I do with a game book, at least not to the same degree. That I know that's going to sound really arrogant, but I do think that human creativity, there is still something unique about the human spirit and how we do. People say, where do you get your ideas from? Whatever the answer is, we do generate ideas. And there's certainly, I've seen examples where people have got two AIs to talk to each other, asking, what do you want to do? And they just go around in circles and nothing actually moves anything forward. They have to have that external prompt, which is obviously what is innate to us. So I think if people want to read AI generated game books, they either weren't going to read the ones written by real people in the first place, or they're going to read them as well as. So I don't feel it's an immediate threat. I understand why artists are very scared. And at the end of the day as well, the other issue, of course, is that all of this has been created through theft. And all the people who created works in the first place aren't seeing any money from this. So there's moral issues, and then there's the environmental issues. So it's a real can of worms. But AI isn't going away. That's obvious, whether we want it to or not. So I suppose that there might end up being some happy equilibrium where people use elements of AI. I mean, I imagine that, well, certainly what we call AI, generative AI, some of that has been around in software before, when the people have used things like Grammarly to check their spelling
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
syntax. And I'd imagine that Photoshop, some of those tools are doing a similar thing to what the generative AI is doing now. So it is tricky. And you could argue there's lots of positives behind AI, not necessarily with game books, but if it's finding the next cure for cancer, I don't think anybody'd say, oh no, we shouldn't have that. I realize I've now gone on a track talking about AI, but I think that's where I feel that there's the most within the groups I'm a part of online with gamebooks. It is this increasing use of or railing against AI. So I think that's going to change things, whether it's for the better or for the worse. Who knows?
Who knows, really. Um, what counsel would you give to someone inspired to create their own interactive fiction? Um, what are the essential skills beyond writing ability, of course? And what are the common mistakes that doom promising projects, in your opinion?
Well, I think yeah, if you want to do it, if you have a passion for it, then do it. It depends what audience. If you're happy for it to be read amongst your friends as well, or just to have written it for yourself, that's fine. But I know that a lot of people who have that desire to create also have the desire for other people to see what they've created. So, as I've said already, there are so many options now with self-publishing and also even crowdfunding, depending on the level of finish you want for the book. The fact you say you need some level of writing ability, I think people forget that, because it is a book as well as a game. So you've got to have skills in both areas if
Game
it's going to
design and
be
narratology.
exactly
Mhm.
going to be really satisfying as a whole. In terms of game design, I've already mentioned one thing I don't like is, meaningless choices, or just splitting up sections for the sake of it, and there's nothing actually to move the plot on or anything. Um, it used to be, or some people used to say, that you can't have a character in a game book. The reader is just this faceless character, and I don't think that's true. You can have a character who learns backstory, or you introduce different elements throughout the adventure and build it up across maybe multiple books, even if you wanted to. So you can still have character development and backstory and secrets in their past coming up, or old foes turning up. It depends how you want to write it. um I'm going back to warnings, I suppose. As I said, I didn't do when I started out, but as I do now, is plot things carefully, plan it out. You need to have some sort of structure, otherwise it will run away from you. Because when you can start to divide everything up, I mean, that's where sometimes people then think, I won't write a game book, I'll write an RPG. Because you come into a room and in a game book, you can maybe have 4 or 5 options at most you'd want. In an RPG, you can have an infinite number of options, and you can't write all of those in a game book. So you need some sort of structure, some sort of plan, and employ an editor. That's the other thing. If you want other people to read your work, it needs to be the very best it can be. And no matter how good you are at proofreading your own work or other people's work, you always need a fresh pair of eyes on something. It doesn't matter. I've worked as an editor, but I still need somebody else to look at my work. I like to think I can generally hand in a clean copy, but there will always be things that somebody else will spot which you've missed, partly because you're so close to it, you don't realize that isn't clear, or you've remembered something in your head, but it's not explicit on the page if it needs to be.
Stephen
Yeah,
King
so that's
says.
something to start off with.
Stephen King says in his on writing
Yeah,
that editing is divine. Right, writing is human, but editing is divine.
yes,
So you have to you have to pay a good editor to read
yes.
your books.
And I don't know who said it, but there was another one. Somebody said, good writing is rewriting. So
Yeah.
um,
I read it too. Yeah.
certainly
Um,
nothing that I write, I don't ever send off the first copy of it. Even if somebody asks me for my author bio, it always gets checked and
and
changed.
uh, I think that Hemingway said that the first draft of any story is shit.
Yeah,
It's always,
yeah,
even his own. Okay, take us back in time to your
yeah.
first encounter with fighting fantasy. What book was it, and how does it feel to have gone from reader to scholar to contributor?
Okay, I was 10 years old. It was the summer before I was going back to school, and I think I'd been dragged into town by my mum to go shoe shopping or something to get ready for the new term. But part of the reward was I got to go to the Waterstones, which is a bookshop here in the UK. So went into Waterstones, and there was a table which had books on it rather than a shelf. And one really stood out because it wasn't like any other cover, because it had the text right in the middle, and it had an old man, what looked like a wizard, with a crystal ball at the bottom, and at the top was a dragon. And it was the first edition of the Warlock of Firetop Mountain. So I picked it up, and I remember flicking through it and seeing the most incredible, gruesome artwork, particularly the picture of the ghoul that's in there, this rotting corpse that's coming to life, looks like it's about to tear your face off. All these amazing Russ Nicholson illustrations, the Peter Andrew Jones cover. You know, then I read the back, I flicked through it, I saw there was an adventure sheet that you're the hero, and I persuaded my mum to buy it. She didn't take much persuading. She's always happy that I was reading. And that was it. I've never looked back. They became a huge craze at my school. Everybody was reading them, but only up until about the first 10, then people started to drop off, and I just never did. Even when I was at university, I would still pick up the new ones, really look forward to them. I mean, for a time, there was a couple of years where they're coming out almost every 2 months. So I was reading these things. I'd always wanted to be a writer ever since I knew it was a job that somebody did. I think probably about 6 years old, I realized it was something I wanted to do. And certainly age 7, I was making up stories at school. We'd been given a story to write. I think it was called Big Eye, and he's sort of an alien character. And I just ended up filling books with stories of Big Eye. I mean, utter rubbish, I'm sure, but I was just got the bug. So having already got the desire to write, and then being an avid reader and loving the fighting fantasy books, you emulate what you enjoy. You do pastiches. So I started writing lots of game books. Most of them went nowhere. They'd get to sort of section 30 and I'd stop, but I'd be drawing the pictures as well, and then I'd start another one, and gradually I wrote more and more until I think I was about 16 maybe, and I wrote one which was 200 sections long and actually finished it. And then when I left school at 18, I wrote to Puffin Books basically asking to write a game book, and they could have ignored my letter, but Mark Gascoigne was the consultant editor at the time, and he wrote back to me explaining what I had to do, that I had to write the first quarter of the book, the first 100 sections, as if it was the actual book, then to give a detailed synopsis of the rest of the adventure, any new rules, highlight any new monsters, unusual puzzles that you might include in there, and then send it off, which I duly did at the end of my summer holiday. I then went off to university. My first idea was rejected, but Mark was very nice. He said, I should say, in the first letter he wrote to me, he finished by signing off by saying, I should warn you that your chances of publication are very slim. So he set my expectations from the start, and he sent back the idea, and there was lots wrong with it, but there were some things he liked. So he said, give it another go. I did that in the Christmas holidays, sent it off. Easter, it came back, and it hadn't really got any better. So I then decided to scrap that idea. And it was a very crude, we're just walking around a forest, meeting random encounters. Although there was an idea tying it together about it being bandits or outlaws, it wasn't really very well thought through. So then I started a completely different idea and worked on that, sent that off the next summer. And Mark at that point said, actually, I think there's something here. Can you just change the start? And then I made those changes. And he then sent it to the editor at Puffin Books, who was Richard Scriven at the time. And he asked for some more changes. So I made those. And then at the end of my second year at university, I got the letter saying, we'd like to commission you to write a fighting fantasy game book. And I've never looked back. So I was then writing one book a year until the series finished with Puffin in 1995. But having met Mark, I then came to meet Jervis Johnson at Games Workshop, which meant I wrote color text for their army books. I then started writing short stories, and novels in the Black Library was set up. From there, I wrote novels for Abaddon Books, a steampunk series I came up with. I've done tie-in fiction for Doctor Who, and everything has launched from that original commission for fighting fantasy. And if I've ever mentioned fighting fantasy, it's only ever opened doors. It's never held me back. So yeah, when I got that first letter, I'd punched the air. I was so excited. And then going in and seeing my book on the shelf in the bookshop for the first time, I actually got a parking ticket because I was there reading my own book. Even though I knew what it was like, I was stood there in the bookshop so long, I got a parking ticket. Then getting the next commission, so it wasn't a one-off, that was exciting. So I still, as you mentioned, the Kingsport Metamorphosis was published last week, and that's still really exciting. The new book day, to get your book for the first time and see it is still an exciting feeling. So with Fighting Fantasy, obviously the buzz of having written them, then meeting Mark, then further down the line meeting Steve and Ian, then I've collaborated with both of them. I've written a book with each of them. I organise Fighting Fantasy Fest. I get asked by people like you to come and talk about Fighting Fantasy. So although there's an element where it's become part of my day-to-day work, there are still moments I have to pinch myself and think, my 10-year-old self would not believe this. And people
That's
I've met.
fantastic. That's a terrific story. Okay, John, that was the last question of the podcast. And thanks ever so much for joining us today. And can you tell us where can people find your work and keep up with your latest projects?
So you'll find me on X at Jonathan Green. I'm on Instagram at Jon Green 71. You'll find me on Facebook as well, and on Blue Sky. On Blue Sky, I'm Ace Gamebooks. So you can find me at jonathangreenauthor.com or also acegamebooks.com. I have a newsletter people can sign up to. So I tell them about forthcoming events, new books, things like that. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Thank you again for this wonderful chat, and best of luck with the Arkham Horror series.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Bye, John.
Bye.